that's a snowplow. How appropriate. Welcome back to Library Says. My name is Jamie, and today I'm recommending 10 of my favorite wintry reads. So I did a list of my favorite cozy fall reads that I'll link up above if you want to check those out, and I was really inspired to put together a list of wintry reads for this season. It's snowing out my window right now while I'm filming this, and it's very much put me in the mood to talk about wintry books. I'm going to start with Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. So this is by no means a new book. My copy is absolutely falling apart. I've had it since this book came out, and it is a YA werewolf romance. And it's very much of its time, circa the late 2000s. This one was actually published in 2009, the year that I graduated from high school, and I was just very much in love with this book. The rest of the series I really could take or leave, but this first book was something special, and I really recommend it if you haven't given it a try. It is about Grace, who has always had this affinity for a wolf she sees every winter in the woods behind her house, and then she meets a boy named Sam, and Sam is a werewolf. And every year when it turns cold, Sam has to turn into a wolf, and he spends winter as a wolf. And the older he gets, the longer he's a werewolf. The shorter and shorter amount of time each year he gets to spend as a human. And they fall in love, and it's wonderful. It's a very quiet story. It's simple. I know not everybody loves it. It was Maggie Stiefvater pre-Raven Cycle, and it's something very different, I think, than her books since then, but I don't know, I love it, and it is so wintry. It's a perfect book to cozy up with a blanket and some hot chocolate and dive into. Next up is a historical romance by one of my favorite historical romance authors of all time, Lisa Kleypas, and it's Devil in Winter. This is the fourth and final book of the Wallflower series, and really the entire series is building up to the couple in this book. Sebastian is a rake of the worst kind. He has done some really some would say unforgivable things in earlier books in the series, and definitely you'll have to decide whether or not it's forgivable and if he should get a romance of his own. The heroine of this book is Evie Jenner. Her father owns a gaming hell in London, and she's a redhead covered in freckles, has a stutter, is absolutely convinced that she's unlovable and no one will ever want her. But then when her family decides to marry her off against her wishes to some awful guy, she decides to run away and under the cover of darkness sneak into Sebastian's club and make him an offer he can't refuse. If he will marry her, then of course she will get his inheritance from her father when she comes into her money, so that she can escape her family and escape this awful man that she doesn't want to marry, as long as Sebastian gives her some freedom, and he agrees. And so it's a marriage of convenience between these two unlikely characters, and I just love them. It's definitely my favorite of this series, and of course, perfectly wintry. Next up is Dash and Lily's Book of Dares by Rachel Kahn and David Levithan. I have loved this book since I was a teenager, and of course now it's a TV show, it's on Netflix. It is a love letter to New York City and a love letter to Christmas, and it's about Dash and Lily. Dash one day is wandering through the Strand, a huge indie bookstore in New York City, and finds a red notebook with a note written in it with clues that are going to lead him on a scavenger hunt through New York City, and he's supposed to leave the book when he gets to his next destination for Lily, and they're going to exchange it back and forth and leave challenges and clues for each other, and whether or not they're going to meet, that's the story. I love it. It's just a great time, and they're both really smart kids, and they're very bookish, and I really related to them when I was a teenager. And I don't know, I loved the Christmas in New York thing it has going for it. And if you've seen the show and loved it, read the book. If you haven't seen the show yet, read the book. Highly recommended. Next up, this one's a little bit different. It is a YA mystery thriller, the first of a trilogy, Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This book follows Stevie, who gets accepted to Ellingham Academy, which is this prestigious school up in the Vermont woods, I believe, and it's winter and there's snow. And also there's a mystery afoot. So Stevie has been obsessed with a mystery that took place at Ellingham in the 1920s, where the founder of the school, his wife and daughter, were both kidnapped, and a ransom note was left signed Truly Devious. And his wife's body was found, but his daughter's never was, and the crime was never solved. And Stevie is convinced she's the one to solve it. So when she gets accepted to Ellingham, that's her mission, her goal. But once she gets there, murders in the present day start happening. So not only does she have to solve the Ellingham case, but the contemporary case she gets pulled into as well. And the whole thing is set at this remote atmospheric, sort of spooky boarding school in the woods in the winter. If that's your jam, I would definitely recommend picking this one up this winter. Okay, so the next book on my list is hardly unknown. I'm sure you've heard about it if you haven't already read it, but you probably have already read it, but I couldn't leave it off the list, and it is Six of Crows, and of course its sequel, Cricket Kingdom, by Leigh Bardugo. This is a fantasy heist novel. It's inspired by Russian and Dutch folklore and mythology, and Amsterdam is really what inspires the city where this takes place predominantly. And it's about Kaz Brekker, who is a master thief, and he's offered a heist, a job that's going to make him rich beyond his dreams, but he can't do it alone, so he recruits this ragtag gang, a motley crew who each bring something different to the table and who do not get along initially, but of course they form this tightly bonded family unit and plan this heist. A lot of this takes place in a wintry setting. There's snow and it's dark and cold and just a wonderful read for winter. I'm sure you've already read it though, so you know that. Next up on my list is The Sugar Queen by Sarah Addison Allen. This is a mostly realistic, contemporary, cozy fiction / romance that has a touch of magic to it, which is normally something that I don't jive with, but this is an extreme exception. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars when I read it last winter. This story follows Josie, who's 27 but still lives at home and has a job that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and she uses romance novels for escapism and hides candy and snacks in her closet because her mother's always criticizing her for her body and for her weight. And then one day in her closet, she finds a local waitress, Della, who starts essentially playing fairy godmother with her life. And it takes off from there. And I really don't want to tell you anything more than that, except that it is wintry. It's like sipping hot chocolate on a wintry day when there's snow outside your window, but you get to stay in and just be cozy in a blanket. Like, that is what reading this book felt like to me. It was hot chocolate for my soul, not to be dramatic. All right, yet another swerve in genre. This is YA, mostly realistic fiction, adventure story, survival story with a little touch of magic also, but in a very different capacity. This is Notes from My Captivity by Kathy Parks. It's one of my favorite books I read in 2019. It's about Adrian, who is, I think, 17, and wants to be a journalist desperately. And her stepfather's an anthropologist. He specifically is interested in this family from Russia that was accused of witchcraft and was chased out into the Siberian wilderness. Legend says they have survived there. Whether or not they actually have magic, who knows? But her stepfather is set on proving that they exist and that they survived and that they still live in Siberia. And so he decides to fly to Siberia and try and track them down. And because she wants to be a journalist, she tags along. This isn't a spoiler to tell you that things go really badly, and very quickly she is the last of her party as far as she knows alive. And then she gets taken in, abducted by the family that they were looking for. And we go from there. It's very wintry, surviving in the wintry Siberian wilderness. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, definitely recommend it. All right, then I need to recommend Alaska Wild by Helen Newberry. This is a romance, and it's a little bit campy, definitely some suspension of disbelief required to buy into the romantic elements of this story, but I had no problem with that because I knew what I was getting going in, and you should know what you're getting going in so that you can enjoy it and just go with the flow, because you will have to do that. This book follows Kate, who's an FBI agent escorting Mason, a former Navy SEAL who is now a fugitive from the law. She's escorting him off for prison, essentially, and then their plane goes down in the wilds of Alaska, and they have to survive together. Realistically, do they fall in love? Who knows? I don't care. They do in this book, and I was here for it. I enjoyed the whole thing. I enjoyed the survival elements, the almost like forced cohabitation elements, and I just dug the romance. I thought they had great chemistry, and of course it's wintry. Of course it's the wilderness of Alaska. Like, what else are you looking for? Go read it right now. Okay, and then I have a book that I will stick on any recommendation list I can possibly fit it on because I feel like nobody on earth has read it. It's an indie published sci-fi historical fiction romance, and it's hard to sell, but I try. And that is Beautiful Wreck by Larissa Brown. This follows Jen, who lives in Iceland in the 22nd century, and it's a bleak, version of the world where there's no wilderness left, nothing green, and everybody kind of lives in technology. And she works for a company that does fully encompassing virtual reality that feels real, seems real, smells, tastes, whatever. And she's testing out a new version of the technology and gets sucked back into the past. Just roll with it, okay? So then she's in 11th century Iceland and is rescued by essentially Vikings and taken to their settlement. And that's where she meets their chief, who has a birthmark that covers half of his face. And so while everyone respects him as a leader, they also fear him and believe him to be cursed. He's not allowed to get married. He's not allowed to have babies because then he would spread the curse. But she doesn't believe in curses because she's from the 22nd century. So she falls in love with him, but he believes he is cursed. And he doesn't want to curse her or have cursed children. So I guess they just can't be together, right? This is beautiful. It is the slowest of slow burns. Just rip your heart out, stomp on it, and then maybe resuscitate it at the very end. But in a way that I loved. Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound enjoyable? But it is, yeah, it's long. It's like 500 pages long, and I loved everything about it. And I hope you will read it so that I can talk to anybody on earth about this book, because so far I don't know anybody who's read it. All right, and then we've reached the end of my list. My very last book that I'm recommending to read during winter is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. I know a lot of people have already read this, but if you haven't, I urge you to give it a go. This is about Calla, who lives in Toronto, but then she finds out that her father, from whom she's been estranged since she was very, very young, has cancer. And he is a bush pilot in remote Alaska, and she flies out to where he lives to spend time with him and to get to know him again, since he is so sick. It is about her relationship with him, and it's beautiful and it's heartbreaking and really powerful. And it's also about her relationship with his right-hand man, Jonah, who has always felt like Ren, Calla's dad, is a dad to him, has always treated him like a father figure, and Calla has never been in the picture, so he does not like Calla very much, like coming in at the last second and trying to bond with Ren, so they immediately clash. I loved everything about this, the small town and all of the characters of this village where Calla's staying with her dad, and the life of the bush pilots and her dynamic with her father, her dynamic with Jonah. Just loved everything about it, and of course very wintry, taking place in remote Alaska. So good. So that's it. Those are my 10 favorite wintry reads that I hope you will read and love this winter. And if you have any recommendations for me, definitely let me know in the comments down below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.